Music sucks. No, I don't agree. Actually, you've had some really good avant-garde classical music. You've had some excellent sound score music that's come out in our time period. So, for example, you have some excellent film music, film composers such as Taro Iwishiharo. He's an excellent composer. Zoe Keating, Julia Kent. You've had some excellent composers. The music that I'm listening to right now is excellent, and that's come out in our time period. You've had some excellent video game original sound scores, such as the Elden Ring sound score. I think was excellent. You've had some the soundtrack for the Japanese version of Unforgiven is one of the greatest soundtracks, if in my opinion, the greatest soundtrack ever made. Lord of the Rings soundtrack was great. The Matrix soundtrack, yeah, absolutely. Great soundtrack. Braveheart had an excellent sound score. And all these sound scores came out in the 90s or in the 2000s or in the 2010s even. The sound score for the film Inception was excellent. So there has been some amazing composers, and I think that a lot of the music that's coming out, or some of the music at least that's been coming out for films and video games, is superior to a lot of the stuff that we heard back in the 70s and all that. Gladiator had a great soundtrack, excellent soundtrack in Gladiator. I think some of the most overrated music is stuff that came out in during the era of spaghetti westerns. A lot of people would think that I'm wrong, but I think the music for that Fistful of Dollars movie, I mean, it's okay, but it's kind of overblown. Do you think modern artists that do all sorts of stuff have much more means are better than classical composers like Beethoven? I think Beethoven is extremely overrated, and I will die on this hill. I'll debate anybody on this. I don't care. I think Beethoven is extremely overrated, and I would like to see why Beethoven is so great. I don't understand why Beethoven is so great. I don't see what the purpose of that is. I don't see really the reasoning why Beethoven has to be worshipped. I think there's a big problem that humans have, and I think we've always been this way. It's the problem of having an opinion that's based on what the experts or what the elitists think. I really believe that this is the case for a lot of us. So why do people think Beethoven is the greatest composer ever? Because someone told them that Beethoven was the greatest ever. Somebody told you at one point in your life that Beethoven was the greatest ever, or that Mozart was the greatest ever. So do you really believe that Beethoven is this great composer, or that he was the greatest composer to have ever lived? Do you really believe that? Because I find myself listening to modern day avant-garde more than I do listening to classical music. I listen to a lot of avant-garde stuff. I listen to a lot of Zoe Keating. I listen to a lot of Taro Iwishiharo. I listen to a lot of these modern day sound score composers because they're great. They're beautiful. They just take you to a different world. I don't really like Beethoven. I don't. I think Beethoven is extremely overrated, and I think Mozart is very overrated. I think Mozart made some excellent pieces. I love his Requiem. But Beethoven, there's only one piece by Beethoven that I really like, and that's his Egmont Overture. That's it. That's the only piece by Beethoven that I really ever enjoyed. For Ellis, that's kind of monotonous. It's just the same thing. The dun 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 dun. I mean, it's just okay, whatever. It's just overrated. Same with Ali in boxing. People say he's the GOAT. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think Muhammad Ali, I don't know why you had to delete your message there, Mr. Johnson, but I agree with you. I think Muhammad Ali is very overrated. I think there were boxers who were better than Muhammad Ali. I think there were boxers that were better than Mike Tyson. I think Holyfield is a better boxer than Mike Tyson. He beat Mike Tyson up. But everyone talks about Mike Tyson. People don't talk about Holyfield anymore. Why not? Because Mike Tyson is considered to be a legend. But why is Mike Tyson so loved? It's because Mike Tyson has said some very weird things that got a lot of attention, and so that attention lives on. That attention resounds to this day because Mike Tyson said some very psychopathic things, and he went to prison, and so he has more of a reputation. People love dysfunctional behavior. They don't want that dysfunction in their own house, but they like looking at it from a distance. Same reason why people loved watching gladiators back in the day. I mean, why would you enjoy watching two men fighting each other to the death? You wouldn't want to be in their situation, so why do you want to see other people be in that situation? So this is the problem with a lot of people, is that they're told what to love. So much off topic. Is that really a problem? I don't know. But people are just told what to love all the time. You know, we're told to love the Mona Lisa. We're told to love the Mona Lisa. You have to love the Mona Lisa. Why? Michael Jackson, absolutely. Michael Jackass is very overrated. I never liked any of that guy's music. It sounds like I don't know, you got a gay guy talking in a mall and he recorded his voice, and then you put the little CD on a computer and the CD starts scratching. I mean, that's what Michael Jackson sounds like. I never really understood the appeal. Why is Michael Jackson so popular? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. But people are told to love the Mona Lisa. Is the Mona Lisa a great painting? Absolutely. But is the Mona Lisa really that deserving of all of the worship and reverence that it receives today? I mean, you go to an art museum in Europe somewhere and they have the Mona Lisa, and you got crowds of people gathering together to see the Mona Lisa. It's like, why? It's some woman looking at a painter. I mean, they didn't have cameras in those days. And I'm pretty certain that when the Mona Lisa was made, that people didn't give a shit about it at that time as they do today. There's probably more hype about the Mona Lisa today than there was back in the day when the damn thing was made. So I remember going to Spain back in 2015. I went to Spain and I saw this painting. I went to this monastery in Spain. It's called Escorial. El Escorial. You can go see it. It's outside of Madrid. Escorial was a monastery that was built for the king of Spain, Felipe. King Felipe was his name. And King Felipe, he wanted a monastery that he could go to so he can get away from the world. He could get away from, the hustle and bustle of the life of a king. And he could get away from all the work that being a king demanded. And so it was a retreat. And so him and his wife would go to this monastery, and you can go to the monastery today. It's huge. It's a ginormous monastery. So when I was in Madrid, I went to Escorial, and I walked around this monastery, and I noticed that they had two bedrooms in the monastery, and the tour guide explained it to me. She said this was the bedrooms of the king and the queen. She told me they slept separately because they weren't having sex in the monastery. Because the monastery was not a place to have sex in. The monastery was a place to focus on God and get your mind out of worldly things. So the last thing that was supposed to be on your mind was having sex. So then they took me down this beautiful corridor. It was this very long and wide corridor, I remember. And on the wall of the corridor, on the left side of the corridor, well, on my left side that is, there was this beautiful elaborate painting on the wall. And the painting was almost as big as the wall. It was as wide as the wall. It wasn't as long as the wall, but it took a huge chunk of the wall. And the painting was of the Spanish army. It was unlike anything that I've ever seen. And I never saw that painting online. You see all these paintings on the internet, on Google Images and such. You see all these paintings, these old Renaissance paintings, medieval paintings on the internet. But there's a whole lot of paintings out there that aren't being seen all the time online. You could see them if you look them up, but there's a lot of paintings out there that cannot be commonly seen or commonly found on the internet. There's all sorts of paintings out there that we've never seen online. I'm not saying they're not online, but I'm just saying that they're not as readily seen as something like the Mona Lisa or, God touching Adam's hand, the famous Sistine Chapel painting. But I saw this painting on the wall, and it was this very beautiful, beautiful, elaborate painting. And it was just epic painting, and it showed the armies of the Spanish, the armies of Spain. You see all these soldiers, like something out of a movie. You see all these soldiers, and they have their armor and their crossbows and swords and horses. And it was just massive painting. And then you see on the other side this other European army, and they got their weapons and their horses. And it's just super, super detailed and elaborate painting. And I said, what on earth is this painting? Can you explain this painting to me? And the woman began to explain it to me. And she said, this is a painting showing King Philip's army, King Felipe's army. And he is about to fight a Protestant army. He's about to fight a Calvinist army. Now, correct me on this if I'm wrong. I could be wrong about this. Maybe I misunderstood or I'm just not remembering things correctly. But the Netherlands was under Spanish control for a long time. And what happened in the Netherlands was Calvinism took over. Calvinism became a big part of the Dutch culture. And so the Dutch revolted. They didn't want to be under Spanish rule. So there was a war between the Spanish and the Dutch, because the Dutch did their little Protestant intifada. They didn't want to be under the Spanish. They didn't want to be under the Holy Roman Empire or anything like that, because Spain was a part of the Holy Roman Empire. So the king of Spain, King Felipe, he had to fight these Protestants. And she was explaining this to me. She said King Felipe had to fight the Protestants and the Dutch Protestants. And so this painting is showing this elaborate face-off between the Spanish army and the Protestants. And I thought, wow, this painting is like something out of a movie. It's like something out of the movie Gladiator. Remember in the beginning of the film Gladiator, you had the Roman army and you had the German army on the other side, the Germanic army. And it was a very elaborately done scene, very detailed, very dramatic, very intense, very graphic. And so that painting was kind of like that. Obviously they couldn't make movies in those days, but they could depict things in very graphic and intense ways on canvases. And so that's what the painting was showing. And I thought, wow, how come this painting isn't famous? How come this one isn't famous? How come you don't have droves of people coming to see this work of art? I was one of the few people in the hallway looking at this painting. There wasn't, in fact, I think I was the only person alongside the two Spanish gentlemen who were with me who were really looking at this painting. And I was really the only person in that hallway who was looking at the painting with intensity, because the two guys who drove me to the monastery, I mean, they had seen it before, so they weren't really too excited, but they were nice enough to take me to this place. But I thought, how come this painting isn't world famous? How come I've never heard about this painting? How come I've never seen this elaborate painting? But everyone wants to talk about the Mona Lisa or this other painting. There's a lot of genius out there that's not recognized. There was a Russian philosopher back in the day. His name was Solzhenitsyn, very famous philosopher in the Cold War era. America used him basically as an ideological proxy to talk about the evils and the despotism of the Soviet Union. Because Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he was, they put him in this island, he was imprisoned by the Soviet Union and all this stuff, and then he fled to America, and he became this person who was speaking and warning people about communism. And Solzhenitsyn, he said something that has always remained in my mind, and that is that a lot of creativity is not recognized. And Solzhenitsyn spoke about this. He said that there are many professors out there in America who are working at some small college somewhere, and they write books, they write essays, and their works are never recognized. And Solzhenitsyn said that they are professors who are obscure, American professors who are obscure intellectuals who no one ever heard about, and they work in these obscure universities or these obscure local colleges. He says, but they can write just as ingeniously, or if not even more so, than a famous academic, but their work is never recognized. And he said that this is one of the problems with the academic world, is that you can have people who are really, really good, right? Or they're really insightful or they have very original observations, but they never get listened to. They never get listened to. And then after they die, all of a sudden their work gets revived. And they sort of live on through their legacy or through their work. I mean, this is not really a good example, but it is an example of someone whose work was never known until after they died. The guy who wrote Moby Dick. I mean, Moby Dick was not a popular book when it first came out at all. Wasn't a popular work at all. No one cared about Moby Dick. But then after the author died, all of a sudden Moby Dick became... Herman Melville was the author. After Herman Melville died, then all of a sudden his work became famous, and then all of a sudden Herman Melville was this master writer, and he was a genius, and his work was so great, and Moby Dick is such a work of art. It's this masterful piece of fictional literature, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden his work is praised, and now you have Moby Dick clubs, and there was a movie that was made about Moby Dick, and there are people who get together once a week and they read Moby Dick, and there's lectures on Moby Dick and essays on Moby Dick, and there's a whole Wikipedia article on Moby Dick, and now all of a sudden Moby Dick is this great work of art. Well, how come Moby Dick wasn't considered a great work of art when it was written? Why that happens, I don't know, but that's just the way things are, you know? That's just the way things are. There's a lot of great books out there that I've read that aren't famous. They are. There's a lot of great works out there that I've read that people don't give a shit about. There's a great work of history that I read called Poland's Holocaust by Polish academic named, Petrowski is his last name. I forgot his first name. Poland Holocaust book. Petrowski. What's his first name? Tadeusz Petrowski. So Tadeusz Petrowski wrote a great book called Poland's Holocaust. It's a masterwork of history, and it's such an original work, and it gives you all of the details of how the Germans and the Ukrainians were working to annihilate the Polish people. And that included the non-Jewish Poles and the Jewish Poles. And he talks about Bandera, and he talks about how the Banderites were butchering people, and he talks about how you had these various SS groups that were working to exterminate the Polish people. You had the SS Nachtigall. You had a whole bunch of other stuff, a whole bunch of other units out there. What was it called? SS Nachtigall, which I think is Nightingale. Yeah, same thing, Nachtigall. You had the SS Nachtigall. You had all these different groups that were just dedicated to killing Polish people. And you had various SS units. And so the book by Petrowski, he gets into graphic detail about what happened to the Polish people. And I think the reason why the book was never really pushed into the mainstream, even though it's very original, because this is not something that's talked about, is because the biggest chapter in that book is about what the Ukrainians did. That's the biggest chapter in the book. He has a section on what the Soviets did, but the section on what the Soviets did is relatively small. He has a section on what the Germans did, and the section on what the Germans did is a lot larger than the section on what the Soviets did. Because it makes you realize, well, the Germans actually killed more Poles than the Soviets did, but we don't talk about that. We want to talk about how the Soviets were the worst thing ever for Poland. We do want to talk about the Holocaust. Well, and that's even interest in the Holocaust is declining tremendously. But we don't want to talk so much about what the Germans did to the Polish people. And the book has a section on what the Ukrainians did to the Polish people, and that section is the biggest section in the book. So the book really is antithetical to the Cold War propaganda machine that we still have. We want to talk about what the Soviets did, or what the Russians did, but we don't want to talk about what the Ukrainians did. And so the book gets into heavy detail on what the Ukrainians did. It's a wonderful book. It's super educational, very informative. I couldn't stop reading it. People don't talk about it. You know, Josephus's book on the war between the Jews and the Romans, I think, is one of the greatest works of literature ever made. And the book is so masterful. Why is the book so masterful? Because you read the New Testament, and then you read, okay, the New Testament, and then you're reading about the resurrection. Okay, what happened to Judea after the resurrection? And then you get into that prophecy by Jesus where he says, this generation is like a guy who got possessed by 7 demons. This generation is demonic. Well, I want to see that demonic behavior demonstrated. Well, we have the crucifixion. That's the biggest example. But I also, because Jesus said that this generation will grow in its demonic possession. Well, I want to see that demonstrated. And you see it demonstrated in Josephus's history on the Judean Roman War. And then Jesus says, this whole temple, it's all going to come down. It's all going to get toppled down. It's all coming down. Not one stone will be left. And we actually see that described in Josephus's book on the Roman-Judean War. And then Jesus says, all these priests who hate me, they're basically in hell already. He says this essentially in his parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And the rich man ends up in hell, and he looks up and he sees Abraham, and he says, Abraham, can you send Lazarus to go tell my 5 brothers? Well, who were the 5 brothers? Well, one of those brothers, at least we know about one of those brothers, it was Annas, one of the main conspirators behind Jesus' murder, behind Jesus' crucifixion. Well, what happened to Annas? Well, Josephus gives us some details about him. And Josephus tells us about what happened to his son. And then you read in the New Testament how this mob of people were screaming, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate says, may I crucify your king? You want me to crucify your king? Is that what you want me to do? And then they say, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. What happened to one of the sons of the one who conspired to have Christ crucified? What happened to the son of Hanan, known as Annas in the New Testament? Oh, it turns out he was blamed. He was accused of being an enemy of the temple, and he was killed by his fellow Jews. You only learn about that from reading Josephus's history. So Josephus's history on the Roman-Judean War, it tells you about what happened in Judea after the resurrection, 40 years after Christ. And you can't beat that. That's beautiful. It's basically part 2 of Judea, part 2 from the New Testament, Judea in the New Testament. And you can't beat that. It's absolutely epic and dramatic and beautiful. And it's like reading a movie. You read Josephus's work on the Roman-Judean War, it's like reading a movie, but yet no one talks about the Judean War. No one talks about these works of literature. People talk about what? When it comes to ancient literature, what do people talk about? They talk about the Iliad. Well, who gives a shit about the Iliad? Oh, they want to talk about the Aeneid by Virgil. Well, these are, don't get me wrong, these are fascinating works of literature because they give us insight into the pagan ancient world. They give us an insight as to the development of pagan antiquity, right? You want to know about the origin of the Romans? Well, read Virgil's Aeneid. He gives you this mythological history, or this mythologization, I can't say this word. He gives us the mythological rendition of ancient history. And that mythological rendition tells us about the origin of the Romans and how their ancestors came from Troy after the sacking of Troy, and then they went to the Balkans, and then from there they went into Italy, and then they merged together with the Latins, and so the merging together of the Trojans and the Latins developed the Roman race. This is the spawn. This is the origin, the lore of the Roman people, and that's super fascinating stuff. But it has zero connection with our Christian culture at all. Nothing. You can go your whole life without reading Virgil. Doesn't affect our Christian society at all. But to learn about what happened with the Jews after the resurrection and how the warnings that Christ gave towards the Jewish people can be read with graphic detail in Josephus. Now that is epic. But they never tell you about that, do they? They just want you to talk about, this pagan work and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Who gives a shit about Gilgamesh? It's fascinating. It's interesting to learn about how Gilgamesh fought the monster Humbaba in the mountains of Lebanon and how he had sex with the goddess Artemis. Okay, it's interesting. All right, a little sex with the goddess, a little Elden Ring shit. All right, that's interesting. There's ancient Sumerians and it talks about the flood, and that's all fascinating stuff. Don't get me wrong. But nothing can beat the epic of Christ. And so how do we learn about this epic? You read the New Testament, you read the Old Testament, the New Testament, the continuation from the Old and the New, and you read about the redemption of mankind, and then all of a sudden you're reading the New Testament, and Jesus is telling the priests of Israel, he's saying, your priesthood is going to go down. The whole thing's going to go down. And the priests were saying to Jesus, what are you talking about? We're going to go down? According to who? We've had this priesthood since Moses. We've had this priesthood going back to Levitical times. What are you talking about? And Jesus gives them the warning. He says, you're all going to go down. Your priesthood's all going to go down. Your temple's going to go down. All your power structure is all going down. And where do you read that? Right? Where do you read that? Because you have these Jewish people who will come and say, well, no, we've always been around. Everything's been around. We've all been around, right? The Jewish priesthood, we invented Judaism, and they'll try to deceive people, try to get people swallowed up into Judaization or to Judaism or whatever, and try to get people to doubt their faith and to doubt Christ. And so you read about the end of the Jewish priesthood. But you have people who want you to believe that the Jewish priesthood was always here and that it never ended and just continued on. And well, that's bullshit. Because Jesus tells them your priesthood is going to go down. Your whole temple system, everything's going to go down. Judaism, as you know it, is going to end. And then you read this beautiful story. Well, it's not exactly beautiful. It's actually kind of dark. But you read this eye-opening story that is recounted by Josephus in his history on the Rome-Judean War. The temple is in flames, and you see this billowing smoke up in the air. It's like when Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed, and Abraham looks up to the sky, and he sees these clouds of smoke from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, because God essentially firebombed those cities. It's kind of like what's been going on in Hollywood right now. And so you see the temple in flames, and the priests run to the Roman Caesar, and they get on their knees and they beg for mercy. And the Caesar tells them, you cannot have a priesthood without a temple, and your temple is in flames. And so of what purpose is your priesthood? And he had all the priests executed. And you read that, and you are automatically hearkened back to the warning that Christ told them. He said, your priesthood is going down. It's all crashing down. And so they murdered Christ for the purpose of preserving their priesthood, because they knew if Christ is allowed to spread his message, he's going to overtake our priesthood. That's what they were afraid of. They were afraid of losing their power. So they said, we got to kill this man. And they killed them. But it didn't preserve their priesthood. Judaism, as they knew it, came to an end. But Christianity, the priesthood of Melchizedek, it lived on. It lived on. But you see that history with all of its vibrancy and with all of its graphic detail in Josephus' history on the Roman-Judean War. The book is a masterpiece, but they want you to focus on some Sumerian king who had sex with a goddess. They want you to focus on some Sumerian king who killed a monster named Humbaba in the mountains of Lebanon. And that has no relevance to our culture. But when you read the history of the Roman-Judean War, you have a better understanding of the New Testament. You can read the New Testament, you can say, that happened. I read it. I read the details. Oh, that happened. You read the New Testament, you read about how this priest named Annas was conspiring to have Christ crucified. Then you read Josephus' history, and you're reading about a guy named Hanan ben Hanan, who was the son of Annas. And Jesus was accused in the mock trial of being an enemy of the temple. And the son of Annas, Hanan ben Hanan, was accused of being an enemy of the temple by his fellow Jews, and they murdered him. But that comes all alive in Josephus' work. It's a masterpiece, but nobody talks about it. there's a lot of masterpieces that are left without serious recognition. I'll read your guys' comments. There's a little bit of confusion about who wrote, or the actual name of the book that I'm referring to. The name, so what's the name of the book Josephus authored? So Josephus wrote several books because someone said, a vassal said Antiquities of the Jews. That's one of the books that Josephus wrote. Josephus wrote a number of books. He wrote his autobiography, which is very short. He wrote Antiquities, which is his most famous book. He wrote Wars, which is the Wars of the Jews. That's the book that I'm referring to. So if you want to learn about the Roman-Judean War, read his Wars of the Jews. Now, he wrote another book, or really, he wrote a series of essays known as Contra Appius or something like that. It was basically a Greek philosopher who hated Jewish people, and Josephus was refuting his arguments against the Jews. Against Appius, or against Appion, I think that is the name of the two essays. But what I would recommend you do is to get Josephus's complete works. So there is a compilation of all of Josephus's works, and they are translated by a guy named William Whiston. Just go onto Amazon and type in Josephus complete works, and you'll get it. And I would recommend just getting a used version, because they're super cheap. And I would recommend just doing that, and you'll get all of Josephus's works. His Antiquities, in my opinion, is more of a commentary on the Old Testament. Pretty much just a commentary in the Old Testament. It's really good, don't get me wrong, but it's basically a summation of the Old Testament with some of Josephus's commentary. Whereas his War with the Jews is an actual history that that recounts details, most of which are not in the Old Testament. So it's a very epic piece of literature, and I recommend it to literally everyone who's interested in the New Testament. While Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered terribly in a dream." Yeah, we still don't know what happened in those dreams. We still don't know the content of those dreams, but it is, again, very fascinating. It says here, Antiquities of the Jews. Let's see, your knowledge of history is so interesting. I really appreciate that. I find this topic very fascinating. I think they just wanted the Poles as labor. They wanted the Poles as labor, yes, but they also exterminated them. They butchered millions of Polish people, and they would also use them as guinea pigs for their scientific experiments. Just look at what the Germans did to Polish people in the Ravensbrück concentration camp. What's your favorite beer? I don't really drink beer anymore because I have a form of gout. But I would say that if I could go back to drinking beer, I would say my favorite was, I really liked Keystone Light. And I did also enjoy Texas Lone Star, Texas Lone Star was great because it was cheap, but it was good quality. But if I really had to choose just one, I would choose Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think Pabst Blue Ribbon was an excellent beer. Cheap, but really tasty stuff. Now, that's my favorite one based on affordability and taste. If I could just choose a beer to drink for the rest of my life without any concern about price, I would say that my favorite would be, what's it called? I forgot the name of it. It's, I forgot. But yeah, I really like Texas Lone Star. What happened to I was eating beets earlier, and it looks like some of the beet juice got on my computer screen. Oh my gosh, now I gotta scratch it all out. Reading the Aeneid was hard. The Aeneid is a fascinating work of literature, and again, I read the Aeneid to understand more about the origins of the Roman people. And it's written beautifully. It's a beautiful work of literature. Email Mel Gibson and tell him to make a movie or show. I would love to do that. And I would love, when it comes to films, I would love more than anything for Mel Gibson to make a film about the destruction of the temple. The thing about people who are really famous is that they don't really listen to people who are not famous, right? Now, they may contact someone who's not famous, but they're not really gonna. If someone who's not famous wrote them, the chances of them responding back are pretty much nil. Let's see. Parable of Lazarus and the rich man. That's correct. That's correct. Jesus was essentially saying they're in hell already, and he was talking about Caiaphas and his brothers and his father-in-law. SS Galatian. That's correct. Yep. And the book gets into detail about that. Poland suffered a lot. Yep. That's correct. They did. The Russian guy from the 50s whose article you're going to read isn't well known. That's true. Yeah, we're going to get into that. Thank you for reminding me. An Arab client paid $450, $450.3 million, which includes commission, for Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. It was sold in November 2017 through the auction house. That's a lot of money. I think Van Gogh or Monet didn't get famous until they died. Really? I didn't know that. I know Van Gogh was crazy, though. In history, often the non-academics are even better than professional historians. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, there's something to be said about that. It's like you're not officially an academic. You didn't want to be bothered with school because school is very tedious and you don't really like to be told what to do by professors because professors always want you to follow some pain-in-the-ass oddball rules. And if you don't follow the rules, they start calling you a moron or whatever, and they get on your ass. So you don't want to deal with these tight-ass professors. So you just go your own way. And because you're going your own way and you're reading and researching on your own pace and not based on the drumbeat of someone else, you're more relaxed. And so when you're more relaxed, you tend to learn things easier when you're relaxed. Solzhenitsyn ended up criticizing America in the end. He didn't stop with Soviet Union. Yeah, I heard about that. The Gulag Archipelago, that's right. King Felipe was a Habsburg. Habsburgs controlled Spain and Austria and the lowlands. There you go. Yeah, so they controlled the Netherlands. And so they were fighting the Calvinists in the Netherlands. The Dutch, or a combination of a Dutch-English. I remember he was fighting the Dutch. I do love art of the Middle Ages. Yeah, it's beautiful stuff. Especially inside cathedrals. Yep, completely agree. Mona Lisa is so famous because of Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, I understand that, but it's like, why does Leonardo da Vinci gain priority over other artists who were also really good? I think the Mona Lisa got popular. Sorry, hold on. I think the Mona Lisa got popular in the 1900s because someone stole it. Really? I didn't know that. George Foreman, yeah, he's never a really big boxer. Did it happen before Dan Brown's books? What happened? MJ's music defined an era. Yeah, it still sucks. A lot of people like Michael Jackson. I mean, all power to you. I just don't really see what the big deal about Michael Jackson is. Modern orchestra is contemporary garbage that is basically modern art. Yeah, but there's a lot of modern garbage music out there, but I could say that about any era of music, really. Especially when it comes to the romantic period of music. The romantic period of music was, I think, for the most part, trash. And a lot of it was just, a lot of it was just asymmetrical sounds that were very unbalanced. And there was a lot of disharmony. And there wasn't a whole lot of harmony, and there wasn't a whole lot of beauty in romantic music. I just think I think most of that music is pretty ugly.